Thank you so much for coming for this sixth edition of Lexus and Whitewall Design Talks. This morning we'll be talking about new frontiers, creatives embrace new technology. And for this panel, we actually brought two very different generations of artists. And Katy Donoghue, the editor-in-chief of Whitewall magazine, will be able to lead the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here today, and to Lee and Sarah and Gretchen for being here. As Laurent mentioned, I'm Katy Donoghue, the editor-in-chief of Whitewall magazine, and I'm thrilled to be joined by you all today and our panelists. I'm going to give a brief intro for everyone before we start the discussion. Gretchen Andrew manipulates systems of power with art, glitter, and code. She is best known for her playful hacks of major art world and political institutions, including Frieze, the Whitney Biennial, Art Forum, the Turner Prize, and the Next American President. In these digital performances, she reimagines reality with art and desire. One of the most influential artists to emerge from the New York City subway art movement in the 70s and 80s is Lee Quiñones. He is celebrated in both realms of contemporary art and pop culture for his provocative sociopolitical works and intricate compositions. Quiñones' works have been featured in more recent years at institutions such as the New Museum of Contemporary Art, MoMA, and MFA Boston. Sarah Meyohas is a French-American conceptual artist who has exhibited internationally. She became a pioneer in the field of crypto art in 2015 when she created a conceptual work, Bitcoin, a form of currency backed by her own artwork. Creating some of the first ever NFTs, she was uniquely positioned to emerge as a pioneer of crypto art, having studied finance and international relations at the University of Pennsylvania before receiving her MFA from Yale. So thank you all for being here today. You all have such unique practices, so I wanted to sort of kick things off by, if you could sort of tell us a little bit about your own practice and what you're currently working on at the moment. I also know Lee and Sarah, you have works here that are new at a few different places. So if you could speak about that, maybe Lee, you could kick things off.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. Well, honored to be here. Yeah, the work that I'm showing at the Untitled Art Fair has to do, at the Leroy Neiman Center for Print Studies, has to do with a sort of a box set commemorating and reflecting on my past years of using the technology of music and the DJ culture of back in the 70s and early 80s as a set consisting of albums that I had hand-selected back then and hand-selected and still play to this day as a sort of a backwind to an influential backwind to my practice of working in the studio as I used it in the same manner of going into those subway yards back in the day. So, and then there's one of my spray cans that are alongside the albums that are coming from my personal collection that I have had in my collection since 1974. So there's only 12 of them, and there's based on a 12 by 12 inch album. So, yeah.
That's fantastic. So they're like 12 editions of the work.
Yeah, I mean it's a huge. It spreads across the spectrum of music, from rock to funk and soul. I mean, you know, you get Edgar Winter Group mixing in with Grace Jones, maybe a little Diana Ross and the Elton John, James Brown. I mean, the whole gamut. So it's a real reflection on what I still listen to today, because it's just a great music. So
that's fantastic. And Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about your practice?
My practice generally, I like to touch very new technology and incorporate it almost in a narrative way in artworks that are essentially performances. So that means, you know, Bitcoin touching crypto in 2015, then, you know, moving on to doing a performance piece on the markets, then doing a giant performance where I was looking at automation and AI, and got men to photograph 100,000 rose petals to create a data set to create AI rose petals. I'm jumping through this very quickly because right now I'm excited about the metaverse, right? That is where I'm having a lot of fun these days, especially with Bitcoin and the community that's building around it. And tomorrow we're releasing a Bitcoin history as a free NFT that anybody can mint and also turn into a poster, which should be kind of fun. But in terms of the real world, I'm very much like concerned about the real world. And so what I'm showing at Untitled, actually, one of the very new things that I'm working on are holograms. And holograms is a term that's now being thrown around, especially in the context of like the metaverse, Facebook, Meta, we're all turning into holograms. The truth is that it's a very old technology, and it's a very complicated technology where the physics like point to like quantum physics. It's like interference patterns, and you don't even need to plug it in. The technology is in the glass, and it's completely archival. And to me, that's where I'm interested in presenting physical works that are about our digital space, but require your physical presence in a way that you couldn't just see with a great screen. So, the holograms.
I mean, what a perfect transition into my work, especially because so much of it doesn't need to be plugged in. So, what I do in my practice is I close my eyes and I think about something that I want that I don't have yet. Sometimes that's a professional goal, sometimes that's political, personal, overlapping, and all of these things. And then I make vision boards, which are on-canvas works, very three-dimensional, very tactile, very girly, very glittery, a lot of sparkles, a lot of butterflies, that visualize the work, that visualize this having happened in my life. They're vision boards, they're mood boards. They come from my painting tradition. But then what I do is I take these vision boards and I program them online to manipulate Google and Facebook algorithms, such that, like, for example, if you go on your phone right now, which maybe wait till after the talk, and if you Google cover of art forum, contemporary art auction record, the next American president, what comes up are not real covers of art forum, they're drawings that are both of and about me wanting to achieve this goal. So I've hacked into and manipulated Google into making it look like my dreams are coming true, but in a way where it's really clear that this isn't fake news. I call it future news, because it's a drawing, it's art. And all of these conversations about truth online and what is reality, I feel like art is such an important thing because art has a different relationship to reality. There's symbolism and there's metaphor and there's aesthetic relation. So my work is very physical, but very similar to Sarah's work, exists in a very performative digital space.
Speaking of that digital space, we're coming off of almost 2 years of a huge acceleration in our interaction with art digitally, for a very real need. And I was curious to hear from each of you about what that's been like as an artist. Have you thought about your work a little bit differently, whether that is making digital art or just showing your art digitally or connecting with maybe a new audience digitally, or just kind of, thinking about maybe there are some mediums or ways of working you'd like to incorporate into your practice? If either any of you kind of could speak to that, perhaps Lee, if you wanted to begin.
The fair that we're part of right now is a result of people wanting to come back into the physical space, and I think the one thing about people said over the last 2 years is that, wow, how are you coping with the loneliness? And I'm like, well, most artists spend a lot of time alone. They're always in the studio just creating, and even if they're in a crowd of people, they're in their own headspace. Like, wheels are turning, you're creating works 24/7, and it's great to be amongst ourselves again physically. When it comes to the digital, I mean, I'm the oldest dinosaur here. I mean, I'm the world's oldest teenager as well. But it's phenomenal. It's a great technology that's been able to keep us keep the threads of the human experience going until we could actually come back together and speak and be face to face. I think ultimately at the end of the day, we want to have options, but we also want to have that real face-to-face interaction. I mean, just my
Can't be beat, yeah.
Yeah.
I found this year quite liberating in many ways. It's kind of a revenge of the weirdos, because if you're producing conceptual artwork or digital artwork, you were always somewhat in the periphery, and now with NFTs, obviously, but generally with people consuming information in a much more focused way online, given just how much more time we spend online and how our identities are becoming more important online. It actually has meant that I've connected with people like all around the world, and they've been able to consume my artwork and have a really meaningful engagement with it without attending an exhibition. Amazing. Like,
I'm really glad that Lee brought up people, especially because while I make these physical works and I've got NFTs, I have work in the metaverse at Crypto Voxel right now with a museum in Austria. A lot that's really changed for me, not just because of the pandemic, but because of these new technologies, are how I relate to my team, my collectors, to press, and I mean specifically using smart contracts, NFTs, to get more and more people connected to my potential future success as a form of investment. Traditionally, you had to buy one of my pieces, store it, keep it, love how it looks. Now I'm getting investment, connection, sponsorship from people who they might not want a 60-inch by 60-inch girly glittery thing on their wall, but they believe in me and they want to be part of that. And that's what I've just been so excited about, is making digitally native work to some extent, but then also like finding the ways to involve more people and have more people literally profit from my success.
To add to the point that Sarah brought up, technology has enabled the art experience, art in general, to be more democratized, because people are able, like you were saying, to engage with the work and at least get like a prelude to like what they may see in the real world when we eventually, hopefully it brings a lot more traffic into institutions like museums, galleries, and fairs, where there's an incredible melting pot of people that never would have, experienced art the way they are now. So that's a great tool. It's been utilized.
and I'd also say that right now I'm really in NFT land, but so I'm sorry to be bringing up this word all the time. But the fact that art is also only one segment of NFTs, and that NFTs cross into popular culture, cross into gaming, profile picture projects are not necessarily art. No one cares that it's art or not art. It makes art less of this white-walled, pun intended, experience. It makes it much more accessible to just kind of step into for people. So.
Yeah, Sarah, earlier you mentioned that idea of periphery, and for each of you in your practice, there was a point at which, or maybe you still feel this way, but you were working in the periphery. Whether that be Lee, you kind of moving the subway art movement into a studio practice and being one of the first to really do that. And like you mentioned, that people don't really care if it's art or not. And I think for probably a lot of the people that follow your work, that doesn't matter to them either. Is this the traditional method of making art? But for some, it can be kind of new to digest or different. What is that like to work or have worked in this kind of radical new art space?
Well, you mean in this?
Now, or
Well, I mean back in the day, the irony is that now, excuse me, people are wanting to embrace and celebrate something that they were shunning you and throwing you to the back of the bus for 40 years ago. The thing about art that people need to remember, at least relevant, important, powerful art, that it comes from a radical place, and radical doesn't mean something really like sinister and violent, but it comes from a very urgent, passionate place. And sometimes art is not accessible to people that really want to read into it and get involved and engaged with it and maybe reflect and maybe get something out of it. And the art world was a very different place 50 years ago. So it was very kind of like velvet rope mentality that we bum rushed by our urgency, but also our resilience and persistence to continue our craft in a very, literally using the vehicle, a moving vehicle, which was in a common world sense, that was Instagram back then, the subways. I called it Insta-damn, because it was like you saw trains that were painted in the Bronx come down to go through the very heart of Manhattan, end up in East New York, Brooklyn, and touch so many souls, both young and old. And no one really knew each other, but you kind of knew who they were about. And in my practice, I used music as an influence, but it was all about advance through repurposing the tool. And the tool was the spray can. When you think about that technology, the spray can, you may see one or two hanging out in de Kooning's or Picasso's studio, but what were they using it for? Were they experimenting as much as we were back then? No, I don't think so. But here comes this whole rather limited palette of colors that we took on to ourselves as a very rapid tool to apply a vibe, a feeling, a name, an identity. And then it grows by virtually using these caps that were in common household spray products like starch remover, like oven cleaner. And those caps enabled us to, attach those to the cans of paint and then have a fan of paint like this fat as opposed to this small. So now you can cover vast areas really rapidly, and then that led to I can create something bigger, more ornamental and more celebration of myself and enhance the movement forward. So yeah, the movement was very radical, but so that was the options that we instilled in ourselves. We are going to paint the town red with paint instead of with blood. So, and that was New York back then. And I could defend that time very passionately, but it's led to a point where we can have a round table conversation now amongst ourselves about new things in the future, looking into the future, reflecting on the past, but also being in the present. So I have a hard time now removing myself from, hey, are you still painting trains? I'm like, dude, I have a family, I don't live with my parents, and that was a different chapter, and that was that was the peg on that ladder. So here I am, and I'm speaking with artists that I probably would never met. Or people that I'm talking to, I would have never met if I didn't keep that persistence going. So anyway.
Thank you for that. Sarah, could you tell me kind of about what your experience is like working kind of outside traditional modes of art making?
Yeah, somehow, and I call myself a conceptual artist, which somehow tends to feel like a bit of a peripheral place these days. Doesn't seem like conceptual art is like the fashionable thing to be. So I'm so unfaithful to any medium, right? I've jumped from cryptocurrency to markets to AI to virtual reality to augmented reality, now to structural color holograms, right? I jump, and so sometimes it feels like it's hard for people to follow what the thread that connects all of them is. And the market, right, and the art world doesn't absorb that very easily, because you want a certain amount of repetition to accustom a viewership of the language that you're building, and to be always enhancing and adding complexity to a set of terms. And since I don't do that, that's kind of put me a bit on the quote unquote periphery. But I don't know. There's nothing to change about that. And now it feels like it's okay, it's fine.
Would you argue that it's sort of that's a radical move on the part of
Yes.
because the art world is being shape shifted, by these options that are now on the table. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yeah, it is a radical move to not be consistent, to be consistently inconsistent. But there is always like the thread of the subjects I'm interested in, which is, feminism, femininity. These are two different things. Um, how really nascent technologies change the way we see the world and understand the world. And three, really being honest about the impact of like economic structures and systems on the most meaningful things, which are, value and truth and beauty, right? These things are not divorced from like capitalism or, how or technology, right? And so those are consistent themes that just find different forms all the time.
The periphery that I was squarely on maybe 2.5 years ago, when I started making artwork about wanting to be part of the art world, ironically, or magically, or totally intentionally into my design, here I am. And, I sort of threw out the idea that artists aren't supposed to be openly ambitious and that women aren't supposed to be openly ambitious. And it was so uncool when I talked about wanting to be in a place like this, when I'd been making oil paintings for 8 years and nobody gave a fuck. And now it's kind of cool and fun and playful because I'm on my way, I'm here, I'm on this stage with these fabulous people speaking to all of you. And I guess I just think a lot about how that periphery and that center and that notion for us is really obviously deeply flawed. And as I build my team and accumulate my power and take on Freeze, take on Art Basel, take on these things, and as I get invited to these stages of places I've been taking on, expanding that to the presidential election, to Brexit, to how women are represented online, these other power structures that are big tech, are, global politics. And it's really, for me, so much more, especially recently, about being your own center, having your own table of people, deciding who sits at it with you, and having certain standards for who I want to hang out with, for lack of a better term. This is our life. We don't have a work-life balance. We have a life's work. And I think about my career as this rustic dinner table with lots of food, lots of wine, and I want everyone there to like hanging out with each other and after table and be there. And that has always, not always, but in the last couple of years, really made me feel more and more at the center of where I want to be, which is the center of my practice, the center of my art world family. And I know that sounds so cheesy, but it's an image I literally reflect on every morning.
I think that's such a beautiful idea of the life's work, which of course, for artists especially, that is so real and not something that you totally can separate from yourself. The word value has come up a bit in the discussion up here, and I wanted to get into that a bit more and throw out the question of how you're seeing what is valued, what is valuable, or how you're thinking about value in the art world at the moment and how that's evolving.
Why not?
Yeah.
Because it does sort of go off of the what I was just speaking about. Why I'm an artist is the artwork that made me fall in love with art. And yes, there's an aspect of my practice that is gaming the system, playing with power, playing with the system. But ultimately, what I love about artwork is an embodied aesthetic relationship to something, a relational aesthetic. Remember seeing Starry Night with my mom when we went to New York when I was 13 and just being like, whoa, it's better than on the mug. And it's very good on the mug as well. And I guess just really that value to me is at the core of my practice. Everyone can have a different set of values and what they care about, but having this very hacker, very performative, very digital practice where I manipulate algorithms, my practice and my market is very traditional. I make single objects on canvas that people live with. And that doesn't have to be for everybody, but that's why I became an artist, is I loved that thing. And finding ways, as both of these artists do, to, I guess, stay really grounded and connected to the reasons why we do this. And some of those reasons might be more digitally native than mine, but like, I spent 5 years working with Billy Childish learning to figure draw when I decided to become an artist, which is not wasted time because it's what I love.
I value my work the same way I did 47 years ago. I arrived as a visionary, expressionist, painter. Really, I never thought of myself, I am an artist. I thought that was a title, like, are you an artist? The irony about the school that I came from, we were always, again, labeled as vandals, right? So art was never part of the vocabulary, anything, or any description of our work. And, you know, when people started saying, oh, you guys are graffiti artists, I was like, well, that's kind of contradicting itself. Because graffiti is like, sort of like tied in, it's tethered to like your term of like your without permission, vandalizing, scribbling, without any, sense of direction. But then you're an artist. I'm like, they kind of like, that's water and oil, that's milk and water probably. But I value what I felt back then, and I still feel to this day, that I value a good exchange rate with the surrounding audience. I was sort of incognito, covert, whatever you may call it back in the day, watching people on the subways walk into my cars. Mind you, let me explain something. I did entire whole subway car murals. So when you walked into a 52-foot subway train, the whole side was painted end to end, side to side. And if you look up my name, you'll see what I'm talking about. So those things were tantalizing, but I could never have a conversation with the audience. I had to keep low key for obvious reasons, and I just enjoyed being in the center of the theater, watching people's reactions, whether they were good or not. So what drove me back then was to have a voice in the ghetto, to phrase a famous voice of the ghetto. Another graffiti writer, as we were known, by the name of Stay High, wrote Voice of the Ghetto. It was so genius, ahead of its time. But what kept me going then and what keeps me going now is having the pulse on humanity, on society, on what keeps us all going, telling that human story, whether it's abstract or pictorial or whatever. It's a vibe. I work off vibes because vibes are real feelings. Ideas are sort of like preemptive, like flash in the pan kind of thing. And I don't like that term, idea. It's like, I have a great idea. No, I have a good vibe coming through me, and it comes through that paint. And I don't work with spray paint primarily anymore. I work with a lot of tools, so I'm experimenting, and I'm in that round table. Or possibly I want a food fight. I want a food fight at that table, because I want people to like just have their opinions, throw it on the table.
Kids' table.
Well,
You're at the kids' table.
Yeah, yeah, and it makes for very colorful, conversations. And again, going back to appropriating things that were there, technologies that were there, the DJ culture as we know it today, hip hop as we know it today as a global movement, could not have started without certain flashpoints happening. And one of them was the blackout in 1977 in New York. Everything was being looted. What was the most things that were being looted? Sneakers, clothes, and DJ equipment. So the next day, there were jams all over New York happening in that crazy, dreadful summer. And people wanted to extend their voice through that music. by blending that music together and having a sense of savior or saving, because you're savoring, you're sort of like, I want a little bit more of that beat that sounds so good to my soul. I want to extend it, so I'm going to put it on the next turntable and make it 10 minutes long as opposed to 30 seconds long. So it's a beautiful way of like using that technology to repurposing and urgency. I don't know.
Value. Okay, so I feel like I should inform you about what is Bitcoin, because it is my genesis story as an artist, because I did it while I was in grad school, and it is relevant. It is now relevant again. So at the time I was an artist, only Bitcoin existed, and I was thinking a lot about value conceptually, right? What is value? In a void, value doesn't exist. It only appears in exchange when something is in the place of the other, which is fundamentally an act of representation. Representation, very related to art, right? And thinking about currency, what is currency? Currency is not a noun, it's an adjective. Things have currency to the extent that they circulate. They're representations that circulate. So art has elements of currency, right? So thinking about all of these things, and the relationship of value to art, I heard about Bitcoin, I heard about Dogecoin, so I thought I should create Bitcoin. So both a play on the dog and the woman. So forked Bitcoin, created Bitcoin, and I decided to back it at a fixed rate by my artwork, right? By photographs that I editioned, that I called speculations. Again, another play on words that's related to value, both financial speculation, but also speculation as it relates to mirrors, so like specular relations. And so I created these images that you can go see at Untitled, because this was the genesis of that construction, as a literal kind of visual metaphor for kind of the blockchain too. They're blocks that are infinitely stacked one, and it's also, light is caught bouncing between the two planes, so it's kind of a constant like exchange and an image of an image of an image of an image. And so Bitcoin at the time, right, clearly was like a sticky idea. People wrote about it, people were excited about it, but the landscape and the technology was still not there, right? At the time, a DAO was the first DAO that was created with $150 million was hacked, right? Like Ethereum had to be forked, right? We were a long way from NFTs. But the point I want to make is, so this is a proto NFT, right? It's like putting art on a blockchain before smart contracts. And the point I want to make is that this could have only happened really from like an artist thinking about first principles almost of like what is value and what is art and how do I push trends that I'm seeing to really a satirical extreme. And that's, I think, the power of art, right? Beyond, art valued in a market, but art as like a pointer of possibilities before they're commercially viable, right? And that's a huge value that art has. So that's that.
And Lee, you said the word flashpan. I think it just speaks to what you were saying, Sarah, too, is it feels like we're in that kind of moment, that's kind of like really flashpan moment at the time. But before we open up to questions for the audience, I know maybe some of you do have, I wanted to ask a final question about kind of at the moment and in the future, what you're thinking about in your practice, what you're excited to explore next, if you can share a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I'm all over the map in my work. I know that I'm exploring many, I'm into the sculptural, physical, three-dimensional sphere right now. I still love painting, it's very immediate. Drawing is even more immediate than that. Pick up a pencil and a paper and you're there. But I'm into I'm a hoarder. I have lots of things in my studio, in my home, all for anticipated works in the future, reflecting on technology. I just want to, like I said before, I just want to be, what's very important to me in the studio is that I always call the studio that has only 3 walls. There's the 3 walls where I paint on, and then the 4th wall is not even there. It's an imaginary wall. It's the open market. It's the open world for the rest of the world to see the work. So it has to go through a very strenuous, painful vetting system through my eyes and through my feelings before I can let it out and lease it out to the world. So, but anyway, I'm looking forward to a lot of great strides and new directions, working with photography, that technology, and infusing my paintings, my drawings, my actual hand on the work. So, because I love photography, I love cinema, I love film, and actually for the very first time, collaborating with some of my most celebrated peers that I really respect. So, because I just feel like 2 voices have more extension. So I'm looking forward to that. I think it's going to be great times ahead. The art will actually be a reflection of our time now, whether we feel we're stagnated and paralyzed. I think the art will jumpstart us again into the new normal, whatever that is. I don't even think the world was ever normal, but I think we're going to go into a new phase, and the art will be the spearhead of that. So I'm happy to be part of that. Yeah.
Thank you. And Sarah, what are you kind of excited about working on next or percolating in your mind?
So I'm very excited about everything in the family of holography, structural color, diffraction gratings, HoloLens. I have a musical piece in HoloLens, which is a physical player piano, and then augmented reality birds land on the piano and trigger it to play. You see it through a Microsoft HoloLens, and then speakers spatialize the sound. So it's a mix of musical composition, animation. So I'm excited about that, and I've been very slowly working on a movie that's an adaptation of the myth of Medusa set in the perfume industry. Very on-brand Bitcoin cloud of petals. So that's been a slow process, but I'm still excited about it.
That's great. So in a lot of ways, my medium is power. And a lot of the projects that I'm working on really explore that and continue to explore that. I've got work up at the Francisco Carolinum in Austria right now, which is where the first museum NFT show was. Unfortunately, Austria is back in lockdown. So my solo show is beautifully closed off. But the metaverse exhibition at Crypto Voxels is alive and well. I call them glitch GIFs. They're NFTs that are presented as GIFs. Google only reads the first slide of a GIF when it presents a result. So what looks to us to be a glitch, Google takes as the entire truth. And they're actually vector vehicles that perpetuate my hacks to auction records and the New York Times. Those are on Crypto Voxel right now, and they're also available on Koenig's Myth Art. But then I'm doing a really exciting virtual reality project with the National Gallery in London, where my work and works from the National Gallery collection are going to be exhibited together in VR as an official digital loan from the museum, which is a really exciting legal project, not exciting to talk about. But then I do want to talk about next year, and what I've really been working on in the studio right now is taking this approach to Facebook instead of to Google. And have you ever clicked on an advertisement and then that advertisement follows you around the internet everywhere? So I'm going to use that same technology, but I'm going to use my art. And so I'm making these glittery vision boards that say things like, you already have everything you need to be beautiful. And that will follow you around the internet instead of an advertisement that says, buy this, buy this, buy this. So it's a similar reappropriation where there's a physical work, but you can go to the website and click which one you want to install. And by clicking which one you want to install, the Facebook tracking code ensures that that installs throughout your whole digital life.
I will be thrilled to have that message follow me around on the internet instead of, like baby toys after I've looked at some trucks from my son. So I would appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to just take a moment in case there's anyone in the audience here that might have a question. I believe we have a mic at the back, or we can use my mic. Oh, you have one. If anyone wants to raise a hand if they have a question for our panelists this morning.
Hi, everyone. So I wanted to bring up, I mean, personally, I have a lot of skepticism around the idea of the metaverse, and that I think it's kind of been this world that's created by tech executives who misinterpret the meaning of science fiction. You know, like the idea of the metaverse, or the title of it, was actually kind of this misinterpretation of a short story, I believe. So I was wondering if you all have similar concerns, and if you think there's room in the mainstream for like more poetic sensibilities, and if that's mainly in the lap of artists to, you know, think about that.
Okay, the metaverse, yes, it's like this super expansive term. What does it even mean other than just like being online? I am not a gamer, but it seems like the most sophisticated online worlds are still the worlds of gaming, and digital art, other social experiences have not nearly gotten close. So right now, if you go to crypto voxels or any of these digital spaces, they're so underwhelming. You spend 2 seconds in them. And that's partly also because designing something in the metaverse requires designing the interaction with it. You know, when you're designing a digital space, like I've been thinking about it, should I create this digital space where I can show stuff? But the way you would design if you allow a user to go from room to room and to travel in it is completely different than if you're just designing a space where you can just kind of look around. And right now, like, the social interactions are meaningless, and frankly, art is best shown in a social space, right? That's why we have profile pic projects right now, because the social space of NFTs is still Twitter, and Twitter only has your profile picture as like your means of display. So yes, it's completely underwhelming right now. I think that gaming is like the future in many respects. I hate gamifying things because art should not have to be gamified to be preying on your attention to keep kind of mind share. So I don't have a great answer. The issue is that creating a really good metaverse requires a lot of resources. Like, it's not something that you can just do on your own effectively. And so trying to get artists to be the ones to like pioneer that is like a technical challenge. But yeah, right now it's horrible. Horrible.
I want to mention that because like I completely have been experiencing the same thing coming from the VR and AR world. I write a column for the art newspaper on the topic. Our next article is on the metaverse. And my friend Thomas Webb at WEBB is making his own metaverse right now. And Vortic, which is traditionally an AR and VR platform for exhibiting artwork, is, in my opinion, one of the best metaverses there is, just like based on these definitions and the ability to interact. And I really loved the point about having such as Webb, such as Vortic, which is Oliver Miro's platform. Art first, not like how do we retrofit our art into these new digital spaces. I mean, that's something I do in my career with hacking Google and hacking Facebook. But actually having really technical people like Sarah, like Webb, like Oliver, building these things from the ground up for art, I think is one of the best things we can support.
Any other questions? I think we have time for one more, yes.
Hi there, really interesting talk. Sarah, when you were talking about Bitcoin, I think you described it as having kind of an element of satire. And I'm thinking now, however many years later, artists everywhere are minting NFTs kind of left, right, and center. Is that like the art world like parodying itself? Like it seems like parodying itself. Like it feels like you've taken like the commercial art world and kind of taken it to almost like a ridiculous extreme with NFTs. I just wondered if you guys could comment on what you thought about that, and if you think there's like more to it than that. Is there like a real, genuine, positive change that can come from this technology, or is it kind of like a kind of in-joke in a way?
Do you mean like traditional art world people minting NFTs, or the kind of what do you think is apparent? Yeah, sorry.
I suppose it's the idea of taking the idea of value again in art, and when you extract that to a kind of purely digital space, where you don't have a physical object anymore, which is the traditional thing that has value, it becomes all about the speculation. It's all about the currency, investing. You've divorced it from what was originally a physical thing. The question, I guess, applies to both traditional artists who are maybe going to NFTs or maybe artists working in a purely digital space. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think it does. I think it's overall a very positive development, even taking account the insane speculation that happens in it. To be honest, the speculation is fine so long as the artist gets a royalty. No artist is like really truly complaining about the speculation because every time there's trading, they get a cut, right? So that's just kind of part of the game. In terms of the parody, it's like right now NFTs are so limited by the medium. It's like a tiny JPEG or a tiny video, right? So in order to be differentiated from the deluge of shit that is out there, you need to either have like Ponzonomics, some sort of like hyped up utility, right? Or build an authentic community around it, right? Or it needs to be historical, right? That's like what Bitcoin. But and this is the reason generative art is doing well right now, right? There's this whole, everybody looking at NFTs, they're like, oh, well, the one kind of silo where something interesting is happening is generative art. And that's because, given how small the medium is, generative art is asking artists to code directly. You can't use Photoshop, you can't use Unity or Unreal, you can't use any of these digital tools, right? You have to just code it. And it has to live on-chain, and this is really reducing your tool set to match how reduced your actual canvas is. And so as a result, these graphics that in themselves, if you didn't know that someone coded, would look completely underwhelming, can become really valuable because you realize the sort of heavy lift, the creative like mastery that had to be done. So I think that generative art is having a moment, partly because NFTs are so limited in kind of their scope. But as soon as NFTs kind of go beyond that, they're just a tool. Like, I really want to see, and maybe I should do it, like someone make land art, like a piece of land art, and that's an NFT, And like whoever has the NFT has the land art, right? Like that type of thing kind of I want to see. So it's one thing just thinking about NFT as a tool, and then another thing as like this kind of all of the stuff around it. But I think overall it's positive, and yes, it's a gold rush, but that's okay. That's like part of the cycle of things getting adopted and people rushing in and being excited. So it's okay.
I think 2 points that you pulled out that are really important are the conflation of the medium with the platform, or the medium with the platform of distribution. And what I love about Bitcoin is it was both. It was a comment on the platform. It was a conceptual work within of itself. And I think when we think about medium specificity of NFTs, or wallet art, as Annika Meyer is calling it, I from a art standpoint, think about like, what does this thing do that no one else does? Like, what's the raison d'etre of an NFT? And that's why I'm really excited about using it to reward and to bring more people into my career. I've got this thing right now called CV NFT that's on my website, and it's basically all of my career achievements, like when I had the book with the V&A, when I'm at the museum right now, and you buy them like Girl Scout badges. And they're like $60 on OpenSea right now. I've only released a couple of them. I've also released future achievements where you can buy my retrospective at MoMA. That's cheap right now. But when we have that, that's not going to be cheap. And it's going to be really fun to have been, I guess, playing in that market space. And I really aspire to the conceptual rigor of the Bitcoin as the real design and origin of that, not conflation of platform and medium, but something that is both in of itself.
So I have one other thing that is kind of a parody. It's a bit of a shameless plug. So I did this project very quickly because I know we're over time. It's called the non-existent token. You can look it up. There's a website, thenonexistenttoken.com. And what it is a smart contract where you connect your wallet, you bid, you send money to the smart contract, and you get an NFT of an animated bubble. And then someone else has to come in at least 10% more and bid and send the money, at which point you get all your money back, plus 5%, and your NFT switches and turns into a receipt that advertises how much money you've made. And this looks like a very honest Ponzi scheme, right? Which it is. It's also completely mimicking the chain of ownership that NFTs normally go through, and the 5% royalty, right, that you get each time. It's just an NFT that can never go down, essentially, and the bubble passes on, and no one ends up really owning it because you can't control someone just being able to outbid you. The bubble becomes bigger over time, and that kind of points to the fact that NFTs are not I could talk about this forever, but NFTs are not ownership. They're attaching your identity to the creator's identity in a tokenized way that points to otherwise free information. And that's the distinction. NFTs were able to unlock value for digital art by sidestepping ownership completely, which ownership requires control over the asset, and you don't have control over the asset. You have control over something simply pointing towards it. Okay.
Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to all of your future achievements, whether I can purchase them or not. And thank you so much to Lee, Sarah, and Gretchen. And thank you all for being here.
Whitewall, thank you.